to thank you everyone for making this time outside of our normal tag meetings to make some serious progress on our initial deliverables for this subcommittee. So we were in the middle of conversation the other day, and I tried to summarize where we had been in the minutes, but I think I captured most of it in saying that our main goals for today are to come up with what our near-term deliverables and timeline are for this group, keeping in mind process, keeping in mind dependencies, and if possible, settle on at least a tentative trajectory for the clean heat standard credits. And I'm going to leave it at that. Any other comments or points that I haven't captured there?
The only thing I can add like a little bit more context to, so in the commission's work plan, this idea of like pacing, the process for pacing is one of the first things that we're trying to address. And we hope to get out a like staff draft proposal similar to what we did with the credit ownership in the next couple of weeks. So basically but I think because it's tied to the first question that is what we're using as the proposal for the department's filing as a proposal, I think that will help like narrowing that and deciding on details for the process for setting and adjusting the sector reduction requirements will help this subgroup like answer questions on setting the obligated party annual requirements, which filter down from there, setting declining carbon intensity values, and establishing and adjusting the emissions schedule, which are all in that like pacing category in the work plan. So I just wanted to add that that's coming, and that'll probably be within the scope of this subgroup as well.
All right, Deirdre, can you just restate? I was just trying to move over to my notes. Of the things you just listed, what is in scope for the thing that the PUC is working on very soon?
So I'll drop the list of things here. So the commission is right now working on the process for establishing and adjusting the emissions schedule. So that's something that the technical consultant is working on. That's kind of what they'll be addressing at the presenting to the tag at the end of this month, but kind of loosely falls in this pacing subcategory. Process for setting declining carbon intensity values, process for setting and adjusting the sector reduction requirements, which is the question that we've already asked and had public process on, and what this group is specifically looking at. But I think we'll provide a more specific proposal in the commission proposal that'll go out to better answer that, which then filters down to the obligated party annual requirements. And then LMI equitable distribution 2, I don't think we have enough information on whether the commission can front load beyond the 16 and 16% credit requirements that are directed to go to low and moderate income customers, but we plan to ask what information should guide that decision on whether to front load or not. So sorry, I don't know if this was helpful or harmful to kind of increase the scope of this subgroup, but I just wanted to mention that that's coming, that a commission proposal is coming on these more discrete matters that we've categorized as pacing.
I think that's a helpful summary of the key points that the PUC has, Deirdre, and appreciate that, because I've been continuing to pull out the key line items out of the department straw proposal, and there's no there's so many overlapping and interactive components to it that it's still in three separate pages. Does that help you, Emily?
Yep.
So if I could just clarify a little further that, so I think our proposal, like Deirdre, you said, the third bullet there, the process for setting and adjusting the sector reduction requirements, and then the fourth bullet, those two are what the proposal,
That's true. Yep.
that I think that's like this, what we've kind of started with. And
Mhm.
then the other three, if the PUC is coming out with a proposal, then it seems like maybe this group or the tag in general, and probably this group for part of them, are responsibility is to kind of review that proposal, and as a tag, or as a subgroup, recommend to the tag to see if we want to make any recommendations to the PUC. So
That's exactly right. Yep.
Sorry, I just have one more clarifying question. So on that, the third and fourth bullets, so is the scope of this work and the wish of the commission for this work to, or for this group to recommend process that then you all incorporate into the staff proposal, or is the staff proposal something separate you're all working on and it'd be more beneficial for this group to react to that staff proposal once it's out?
Yeah, that's a fair question too. I think it boils down to somewhat of awkward timing. But I think because the question of obligated party annual requirements really we can't put out a proposal until the question on sector-wide requirements is answered. I think that's why we're doing it simultaneously. We're also trying to narrow down the sector-wide requirements in our proposal. So I guess I envision this group continuing with the department's proposal and finding issues of agreement or disagreement with the stages and phases that are in the department's proposal, but then we'll probably react as well to the commission's proposal that comes out in a couple weeks that we'll probably address it either more specifically, or maybe if the timing works out and this group has already provided concrete feedback on bullets 3 and 4, then we'll address it that way. But that's kind of where we are with trying to get things out.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. I do have the summary slides that I prepared just to outline what had been in the department's proposal. Do you have a working document, TJ, that would be helpful, or should I go back to those?
the working document for what the department's proposal was?
Yeah, just any condensed version.
I do not have a condensed version. I just have
That's fine. That's fine. I'm just thinking for reference, would it be helpful for me to pull up where I had just pulled those things out to at least get our conversation started? Or
Sure.
I'm going to keep it in slide mode just so we can. Can folks see that? Okay.
Yes.
So again, I just pulled this out based on what happened in the earliest discussions and also what the department summarized for the various steps. So there are, to align with the information that Deirdre shared. There's a section 1 with 2 phases, and then 2, 3, 4, all the way through 7 for the various steps that the department originally summarized for things that we would need to do. And again, they still, in my mind, still don't fit on a single page. But I do want to highlight this item 4 here. It would be good for us to perhaps decide today where we will be counting on information from these other resources, places where we're comfortable possibly making some initial assumptions about what our preliminary recommendation would be. And otherwise, we're primarily looking at phase 1 to help set the baseline and understand what we'd like to define for the target reductions that will eventually be expected of each obligated party, subject to all the various details, for lack of a better word at the moment, that Emily started to point out at our other meeting. They seem simple, but this is where all of our discussion has been.
Sorry, are you asking for feedback or?
I'm just putting this out here as this and phase 2 are the key elements of the department's proposal.
Okay.
For
I think,
the pacing steps.
yeah, so I think there's 2 questions for us. Is one, does the subgroup kind of agree with the process as laid out by the department? You know, and want to recommend that is the process that the PUC adopts, or that the TAG adopts, that the PUC adopts. And then 2 is actually doing the work. And I actually had been envisioning this pacing group of actually doing that work, but right now it just dawned on me that that may not be our role, is to actually do the work, but to just like maybe flesh out or clarify the process. So that may be a first discussion point.
I'd like to respond to that if I can. I believe that, I'll take the last one first. I believe that in an ideal world, we would have liked to do some of that work, and we'll have to figure out how feasible that is. To your other point, it was, had we as a group at least initially decided we were going to work with the department's straw proposal as our basic outline. That was my understanding, but maybe it wasn't formal because we didn't have everybody together. So that's the first piece to confirm.
Well, I think that's so high level, just to clarify our initial deliverables. I think my understanding is that everybody agrees that the department's proposal generally makes sense as a starting point. But I do think there's a deliverable to sort of formalize that a little bit, like to more formally communicate the TAG, agrees with this proposal generally. And then the other thing we talked about last time is that there might be a few places where there are specific assumptions based in, like, what should we use as the reference year? Are we assuming a linear trajectory of reductions?
Those are the things to decide.
Yeah, and so any of those assumptions that are baked in, if we could work towards documenting those and saying, we all agree that it makes sense for this, just anything we can agree on, let's just like write that down, put it in writing. And then I think we're still working this out. And Deirdre was Catherine's here too. We were kind of talking about it this morning, like the interaction between the subgroups and the full TAG. But I don't know that generally a subgroup would make a recommendation directly to the PUC. I think the process would generally be that the subgroup would make a recommendation and report out to the full TAG. And then the full
Absolutely.
tag would sign off and say, we agree with this. And then that would sort of constitute the recommendation to the PUC, which adds there's just a timing and planning dimension there that, like, anything we can write quickly, that maybe we can bring it to the full, we could report it out to the full tag at a subsequent meeting, but we have to plan for some process there. That's going to take time and potentially isn't going to be ideal for Deirdre's time frame. But I don't know that it's avoidable. So, I mean, that seems like a good, for this meeting, I think anything we could, if we could just kind of go through the DPS proposal pretty carefully and maybe start actually documenting, we agree with this, here's our assumption. We agree with this, here's our assumption. I don't know that we actually will have any areas of disagreement, but if we do, let's identify those and see if we can't come to a resolution within this subgroup, then that's something we could report out to the full tag.
Thank you, Emily, and that excellent description. And I do want to confirm that that is the role of these subgroups, is to hash things out, define what we can, bring up any questions, and then because the interest of time, we cannot have these conversations within the larger tag. Then we bring it back with our recommendations, our questions, and I would expect even further discussion before it goes back to Deirdre. We have some good dialogue. I have not seen us at 100% consensus on initial discussion of anything yet, and I think that's by design within the larger tag. So we spent a fair amount of time, even the very first conversation and during the workshop back in February, about what the reference year was going to be. Is there any further discussion that you know of, TJ, within the department or with A&R?
Not anything beyond what we just talked about last week. But we did discuss, I'll just, for Haley, your benefit, we did discuss kind of the emissions targets in terms of that first, the second bullet, I guess, that establishing the target emissions from the thermal sector for 2030. It's actually for calendar year 2029, I think, but for January 1st, 2030, and to potentially just use that target, and then draw a line based on that target, and it just really matters what the reference here is. And pull up that document, which it looks like you have a screenshot of there.
Yeah, yours, I can try to blow it up. That was also my question, is whether the screen switched. So this was the information that you shared with us. Whoops. Is that too confusing, seeing it on OneNote?
That's fine. Right, and so that 2029, calendar year 2029 column is the end spot that I think the commission needs to get to ensure that GWSA emissions get to there in the sector according to the statute. And how we draw the line, I think, we had talked about last time that it might be hard to do anything but linear from even just from 2024 to 2029. I don't even know if we can talk about this. I don't even know if we need a reference here, but just these are the GWSA emissions levels that we have to get to in order to get there by the 2029.
By that January 1st. And one question that I wondered about after looking at these since our last meeting, has the tag in general reconciled the difference between the annual figures and the life cycle figures?
And
Or do we
no,
even have to worry about that at this point?
well, that's part of phase 2 of the process that we outlined, is that the only way you can do that is to really optimize. You need a measure mix in order to
Right.
translate what the impact of the life cycle credits are to the impact on GWSA targets. That is going to come later. We'll have an optimized measure mix as part of the potential study, at least one of them, or one scenario. Might be in the eye of the beholder if it's optimized or not. But and so I think that's later in the process for then translating that to obligations from each entity.
Okay.
Yeah, I brought this up at our last meeting that I think this would be a good thing for us to work on a little, maybe not for today, but at a future meeting, if we could work on clarifying the process for reconciling between the clean heat standard credits and the ANR GHG inventory. The like reconciliation methodology sounded like something that was probably in the purview of this group. But yeah, could we maybe just go back to like, could we just take these points one at a time? I feel like we're jumping around, and I would love
We
to just take them
definitely are. We
the top
definitely.
and say like, I guess first of all, well, why don't we circle back to the overall method first? But I do think it would be good to later, but at some point we should just confirm, are we all in general agreement that the department's process generally makes sense to use as the starting point? Do folks feel ready to agree to that now, or do we want to circle back to that after we like walk through it a little bit more?
I'll put that out for questions and comments. Go ahead, Haley.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to kind of assume the department's proposal as kind of an accepted framework that, you know, we can of course tweak with differing assumptions as we discuss, but I'm comfortable using that as our baseline, our foundation.
Are you, Emily?
Yes.
I am as well. I don't know if Catherine's just monitoring us, whether we need to have a formal discussion or as a subcommittee we've
Yeah, I guess, well, TJ's on the subgroup. I assume you support that. You agree with the department's proposal. Yeah, so I think that's the kind of thing where like it sort of goes without saying, but I do think it's good to state this explicitly in our report out. So, you know, we can document these areas of agreement and then synthesize them and report them back.
Okay.
Yeah, I think starting off with that first bullet about being, you know, I think the department had to be rather general in a lot of the phases or a lot of the steps, and where I think this group could do is boil down, like this group has already discussed, is like, when you're saying most recent data, what does that mean? Does that mean using, so, you know, right now the most recent inventory data we have is 2020. Do we weather normalize, or do we use a 3-year average? So like, I think that's where this group could, because that's going to need to be in the rule, specifics like that, how to define the baseline reference year. And there are other like specific points that I think the proposal could be boiled down to, that this group could add value there.
Yeah. So thanks, Deirdre, and I think that highlights what I guess I was figuring out how to say is, I think our proposal is like a good starting reference point, but even that, you know, phase 1, step 1 is establish total emissions from a reference year. And I actually, after, you know, seeing that data and thinking about it a little, I'm not sure that we actually need to establish a reference year in order to establish the target emissions from the thermal sector for 2030, or to even have the GWSA targets, because we have our calendar year 2024 requirement and we have our calendar year 2029 requirement, and we could just say that the requirements are a linear path in between those. That, I think I've said that before, that's like my starting point, unless we have any information that can kind of affect that line. But going back to, do we need a reference year? And so I guess, sorry, I'm kind of rambling here, but going back to the first conversation, like, I support the department's proposal, but with the openness to modify it a little bit as is practical here. And this first step, I don't know, to get into the meat of it, I almost want to suggest a modification right off to say we don't need to, the PUC doesn't need to establish emissions from a reference year, because we can just draw the line without it.
You bring up some
TJ.
good points, TJ. Whoops,
Oh, no, I was just asking a clarifying question.
go for it and I'll follow you.
And sorry if you covered this last week. TJ, could you explain what the 2024 requirements, like where that's coming from?
Sure. It is simply it's the GWSA requirements. So it's I think it's 25% reduction in emissions from 2005 using the GHG inventory for 2005, and then applying it in the thermal sector, looking for a proportional share to come from the thermal sector based on calendar year 2018, which is what the Climate Council has kind of decided as the reference year for proportionality.
Gotcha.
Circulate that little, is it possible to send that Excel document around?
Oh yeah, did I not? I'm sorry. I thought I did that after the last meeting.
Maybe you did.
I didn't have that. That's why I just had the screenshot, but that's okay.
Yeah, I
probably
feel like
did
I
not.
only saw screenshots of it, so
And I like where this discussion is going, and I'm also mindful of the time so that we cover, that we keep our goals for today in mind. You summarized things very well, TJ, about what all the various reference years and the existing targets for the GWSA. And to Deirdre's point, part of what I think we might need to add in there is some sort of a footnote or comment about, as we look between, say, the starting figures from 2024 through to 2030, 2050, we likely will need to look at how weather impacts both the performance and the consumption of fossil fuels in this sector, how the measure mix might be changing and interacting. So I think we also need to have some caveats in there for, this is what we're starting with. This is the straight line based on the GWSA for the clean heat standard, to reflect what Emily was pointing out as well, that reconciling the other things and carbon intensity, whether some of these figures are fixed or whether they're going to vary over time. I think it will be important for us to at least document that those have been noticed and that we will be considering those over the course of this legislation. Is that capturing, did I interpret you correctly there, Deirdre?
I may need a recap of that, which was quite
It was
sorry.
like,
I was trying to read more of the proposal because for instance, I think like the reconciliation between inventory and life cycle is like very key to this question, like right now, because you can't set the sector-wide credit requirements without translating inventory to life cycle, because credits are based on life cycle. So I know that was part of one of the things that you said, So just putting out there that I think that's pretty fundamental to this question, or, you know, this process question. And I was trying to see if, and I should know how the department handled translating inventory to credits.
And I still think we're jumping around though. Could we just stick with the reference here for a second and see if we have like an agreement on, I know we have a lot to get through, but I'd rather just like complete something and check it off as opposed to jumping around. So I just wanted to clarify, if I go back to the reference here, TJ, are you saying the PUC might not need to establish a reference here because you should just work off the Global Warming Solutions Act target, or because you should just use the most recent data from the inventory?
Because you should just work off of the target. So there's I recognize a flaw in that, is that we may be behind right now to start, and so maybe that's an issue, but
yeah, so that's what I wanted to discuss a little bit. And I don't know if Michelle could go up back up to that screenshot spreadsheet, but and I was just reviewing some EAN data, and it does indicate that we're likely to fall short of the 2025. Sorry, I'm just trying to like move things around so I can choose that.
I could pull up the spreadsheet if it's easier.
Yeah, if you can, if you've got the spreadsheet and also can share it in the long term.
Why is this showing up as is it a 2024 target or a 2025 target?
It shows up as 2024 because the targets in the GWSA are to achieve those reductions by January 1st of 2025.
Oh, okay,
so,
I got it. Yeah, so it sounds like we're running behind, and our best hope of, and I don't know if you all have seen this data, but I just happen to have reviewed some EAN data about this, that we're running behind in our best hope of actually achieving the 2025 GWSA target for the thermal sector is to have a really warm winter, unfortunately. So it's like being exacerbated by climate change. So that's unfortunate. But yeah, so I think that is a real question where, like, if assuming we are behind, aka we're starting off from a point of higher emissions when we draw this line, then I don't know, it would be, I think if you use the GWSA target versus like the actuals, you would end up having a more stringent target in like 2025 and 2026 than you would if you drew the line based on the actual data. Does that make sense? So like you would have to achieve a larger upfront reduction to get back on track, because we're already behind and we kind of need to get back on the trajectory, which means you're front loading it a little bit more. So I do think there's a real question about that, if it's appropriate we're not that far off, probably, maybe. So maybe it doesn't matter that much, but yeah.
Well,
So your question, Emily? Sorry, TJ.
Well, I'm trying to get to a recommendation about what to use as the reference year. And TJ has proposed maybe just using the GWSA target as a reference year. And to me, there's a question about whether it makes sense to use the target versus setting it based on what is the most recent greenhouse gas inventory data we have? It's way back there.
It's 2020, although in a month we will have 2021 data, I think.
Right, so that probably doesn't make sense either then.
Well, you know, I actually think you're making a really good point, Emily. And so we could, just to reiterate, is that if we set the target, 2026 is the first year, if we set it at that level that just draws that straight line from 24 to 29, then 2026 is going to feel more stringent because we're so far behind. So
is there any way to do, I don't want to derail us completely, but TJ, did you review this, that EAN paper? Like I just happen to have just reviewed this paper where they were looking at why fossil fuel heating sales in Vermont have declined, and they were doing it based on like heating fuel sales reported by the tax department, which we actually have much more recent data on. They have 2023 data for that, and there might be a methodology difference, but it would seem to me that like we do have more recent data from the tax department that would be pretty easy to convert like gallons of oil and kerosene and propane gas to GHG emissions as a proxy. So that would be another. So those are like three possible methods for reference here. One is to use the targets. One is to use the most recent GHG inventory data, which will be very outdated. And another might be to sort of do some interim proxy calculation back based on tax department sales data.
So I'll just put it out there. I would support using the tax department data to have a little more accurate line, except I wouldn't actually want to use 2023. I would rather use 2022. And that's just because we're going to be counting early action credits. And I don't want that to mess up when we do that translation to the measure mix and what credits might be available. I don't want there to be some sort of double counting in there. So it probably could be avoided using 2023, but I feel like 2022 might be better just to avoid the early action credit issue.
From what I'm hearing, might we be at a point to say that we are getting closer to understanding what the trajectory would look like? Possibly or probably a straight line, though not necessarily straight the whole way. But there's a few more things that we need to clarify to say whether we're starting at the 2020 at the highlighted targets right now. At this point, we are trying to understand if we've got a trajectory. And given the fact that we still need more information, would everyone in this group be comfortable with a relatively straight line? Possibly with a different, possibly with that first year starting point dependent upon what information we might have in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Are we likely to have the 2023 numbers? Or the most recent ones that you were referencing, TJ?
Yeah, it usually comes out sometime in May, but I have not talked to A&R about it. So I'm messaging them right now. So.
Okay. Well, to Emily's point for having at least some sort of a decision on this particular topic, have the conversations that we've had brought us any closer to consensus?
I do want to say I feel like the decision about like straight line or trajectory is a separate discussion from reference year.
Yes.
Both of which I think we should have, but just wanted to call that out. So I think there should be consensus on those things separately.
Yeah.
Important point. And
yeah, I agree with that.
Sorry, Emily, is it possible to share that paper that you were just referencing, or is that something that isn't public domain yet?
I don't think it's public yet. I think it will be published very soon. I can check with them. I found it quite useful because they're also like the preview of the results is there actually has been a noticeable decline in sales, and then they're trying to see how much of that is attributable to weather, just that we've had warmer winters versus some kind of like fuel switching to heat pumps or other factors. So I did find it quite useful for this group's work. I will check with them and report back.
That
but
would
yeah.
be helpful because it would be great if we could all see it when it's available.
Yeah, I would prefer to like, so I just documented 3 options on reference here. One is to use the Global Warming Solutions Act target in 2024. One is to use the tax department fuel sales data converted to GHGs, and maybe using 2022 data to avoid double counting or complexity with early action credits. And one would be to use the most recent GHG inventory data, which will probably be 2021 data soon. So I think, I don't know, my default is so I don't know if we, like, do we have enough information to just make a call and be like, do this among those 3 options, or is there some more information that we would like to have to be able to decide between those 3 approaches for the reference year?
So what happens if we, I don't know if we care, but I just want to bring this up, but what happens if we use either 2020 as a starting point and draw a straight line, or 2022 and draw a straight line? And does it matter that we haven't hit our target in 2024? No.
For the
I see a
purposes
couple
of
you
this
shaking your head.
meeting, for the
What's that?
purposes of this meeting, I don't believe so. We are putting together a recommendation for the theoretical process for the commission to use.
I
And
thought the requirements though had to meet both 2025
Just
and
2030 and
2030.
2050.
Oh, just
Right.
okay.
And the
Thanks.
first obligation year is 2026, right? So that's really what you need is 2026, 7, 8, and 9.
Yeah, basically you need, because the rule has to include a decade of credit requirements, you're really making a lot of assumptions. But if 2026 is an implementation year, the rule needs to include credit requirements for 2026 through 2036. And so 2026 to 2029 is going to be tied to the 2030 goal or obligation requirement for GWSA, and then the 2030 to 2036 to get to the decade would be tied to the 2050. At least that's how I think about it.
I feel inclined to use one of the actual sources of data, whether that's tax department data or greenhouse gas inventory data, as opposed to a theoretical target to develop this, because that just seems more grounded, and that we're perhaps less likely to end up with some kind of targets that are unrealistic in the early years. But I do wonder, and then I like the idea of using just whatever we think is the best data, which then leads me to a question of the tax department data versus the greenhouse gas inventory data. And like, I wouldn't want to use a methodology that's like really out of sync. Like if we think the tax department data is the best data we have and it's going to feed pretty directly into the GHG inventory, then I would be inclined to use that. But if TJ or somebody were to tell me like, yeah, we've got this tax department data, but we use a totally different method to do the greenhouse gas inventory, and we're not going to use any of this data, and none of it's going to translate, and we're going to end up with a lot of mismatches, then that would worry me.
Yeah, that's what I feel like. I don't know enough either about how ANR compiles the RCI sector in the inventory with the tax data. Like what other formulaic piece goes into compiling the inventory, because there's a 3-year lag for a reason. And for ANR to compile that inventory. So I don't know enough about if just the aggregate tax data would be a good proxy, or if it would be incomplete.
I think it would be pretty close.
And is that, can I just, Deirdre, you must know the answer to this, but I know I've been kind of like, I'm aware that there's some sort of registration process going on. I'm not following it closely for the obligated parties. And there's also, I think this tax data reporting is pretty new. Does the obligated party reporting include any actual like annual reporting of fuel sales? Is there going to be some change to the, because that might be something to factor in, like this is what we would use to develop the baseline, but then I'm just trying to understand the landscape for what data we're going to have.
Yeah, so anyone who sells fuel into or in Vermont has to report to the commission annually about sales from the previous calendar year. That should, for the most part, match what they're reporting to tax, what they're paying the fuel tax on. But I think we only have, after this first year, I don't think we have individualized tax data. We're going to have access to aggregate tax data like ANR does in future years. But yes, that'll be broken. The fuel is broken down by type and volume, for the previous calendar year's sales.
And do those tax records, is that only the final sale to the end user?
So that is what that we had to make that distinction in the fuel reporting. We had to ask whether they were sales that were essentially you paid the fuel tax, or they were gallons that were resold, where the fuel tax doesn't apply. So to try and capture that nuance of fuel being sold in the state.
Okay. I know that had been an extensive topic of a topic of extensive discussion at previous
Now,
town meetings.
when are you going to get that first year of data? Like, do you already have that for 2023, or is it going to start in 2024?
So we have it for 2023. I think the issue has really been to organize that data because, we were required to collect supplier information, and there's basically a lot of reporting gaps, given it's the first year. So it's been a lot of investigative work of being like, okay, this person said they resold the fuel, for example, from to an entity that didn't report at all. Is it because that fuel was reported or was sold outside the state, and the emissions happened outside the state, or is it because that entity didn't report the fuel that was sold to the end user within the state? So anyway, that's I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but
Yeah.
that certainly the fuel reported from the previous year is part of this conversation. I don't know if we want to go back to baseline here, but it's definitely part of boiling down the credit requirements for the entire sector into the individual obligated parties' credit requirements.
So to get back to our initial target of setting at least ballpark annual targets and a trajectory for thermal sector for 2030. Are we making progress or still putting questions out?
I think we're making good progress. I put it in the chat just the link to the methodology for the inventory. It's not the inventory itself, but it actually looks like it uses the EPA data set, the tax data. I think they use the tax data maybe to confirm, but I can follow up and ask if
Yeah,
something like that
are you,
fast,
I
but-
think I just went and looked for the same thing, and I was just trying to look at that too, that the data for all the fossil fuel input values used for the RCI, which is residential, commercial, and industrial sector, are default values from the EIA SEDS data set. Is that what you're looking at, TJ?
Yeah,
What is, um, yeah, so I don't know. It would seem to me that whatever tax department data Vermont is collecting is probably better than some national EIA data. So that then makes me wonder, like, are they going to need to update their inventory since we're going to have this whole host of new data about fossil fuel sales in Vermont that might not have been available in the previous. Sorry to just uncover more questions.
That's part of why we're here. That's part of why we're here, to understand the nuances involved.
But yeah, maybe at one of our future meetings, we could have like Brian or somebody from ANR join us and ask somebody to come and talk to us about this methodology, and we could dig more into the reconciliation issues. Yeah,
So- I can I
Yeah.
just say one other thing? I feel like we're spinning our wheels quite a bit, and maybe we don't need to on this issue. I'm gonna just share my screen one more time. Finally was able to do the math that I wanted to do.
Excellent.
So this is the same document, but the yellow highlighted is what I had suggested before, just going from 2024 to 2029, and that's the trajectory here. You can see at 2026 it's 2.14 versus if we just start in 2020 and go to 2029 in a straight line. You know,
It's
in 2027 we're like 2/100ths of a million metric ton off, and it's pretty close. And so maybe we don't need to worry about it so much. We're trying to get like a false sense of precision when, as you
Yeah.
said, Emily, like the biggest determination of if we make it is really the weather. So I almost just want to say, let's just use 2020 and do a straight line. And if 2021 data comes out, we can just do that and use a straight line instead if it's much different. But and then we could start there and then answer the question that Haley raised separately of whether it should be more parabolic.
And so with this, would you assume that 2021 through say 2025 emissions targets were met? And then when 2026, when you're creating those credit requirements, would you just go off of 2025?
I think this
Or-
would just start with 2026. Really, like these are the only years that really matter right now, right? And so, if we're behind on this trajectory here, this straight line trajectory, which maybe or maybe not, then that creates the issue. Emily, you were talking about where maybe 2026 is a big jump for people. But that's more of an issue of, do we make the line a little more parabolic?
Hey, TJ, can you do me a favor? Just looking at this EAN paper, it sounds like where the estimated emissions for 2023 based on these tax fuel sales is 2.67. So if you do it off of 2.67, I'm just curious what the trajectory looks like.
Sure. I think that's
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that looks right. about 0.16 every year. So yeah, we're, in 2028, it's pretty close. This is the biggest difference.
Yeah, it just means that if we did that linear trajectory, that the initial savings would be more front loaded.
Mhm.
I don't really understand how the early action credits will work, and whether the fact that people could like bank credits means they can kind of like get 2 years of credits in 1 year, which will make that easier to accomplish, or not.
The way I see that is that it doesn't really matter. The early action credits, the only purpose for that is to help get people get started early, and those people will get kind of a windfall in the clean heat standard, because we just have to hit the target, and they the target of clean heat credits, the number of clean heat credits will just have to be increased by the number of early action credits that we estimate exist. So, if there was 0 early action credits, maybe we need 100 or 1,000 clean heat credits every year. But now there's, now there's an extra 100 clean heat credits out there for early action. We still need to hit the target, so now we have to get 1,100.
Yeah, so looking at the range of possibilities here and barring some wildly different result from the 2021 GHG inventory, it looks like using the 2024 GWSA target actually gets you like right smack dab in the middle of the two other ones, which makes me think maybe we should just recommend using that. Like, I mean, we could continue to like gather information, and or we could just make a call. And
I'm not sure if it really matters, but it feels right to have the starting point be the same data set that the endpoint is. So 2020 inventory data being used for a, inventory-based 2029 goal. I like the apples to applesness of that.
sorry, do you mean having both of the goals in terms of the GWSA target or the inventory, or are those the same things?
I guess that was in support of using 2020 inventory data as a year to start a reference year, so to say.
I think I can get behind whatever everybody decides, honestly. Any of these seem so close to me. I feel like it's almost like a false level of precision.
And is the inventory like the achievement of the 2024 or the 2029 goal is going to be based on the GHG inventory for that year?
The achievement is based on the inventory for that year, yes.
Okay, so it's kind of the same thing, like the target is using the inventory method.
Yeah. I did another line of starting in 2018 because that's when the proportionality was set. But it's also about the same.
No, that one's a fair amount lower. I mean, these seem small, but they're like pretty big differences.
Yeah, actually, I guess that's true. It is lower. Lower earlier.
So yeah, again, like I think just in terms of like getting to a number that's more realistically achievable in year one, I mean, it could be a question of which baseline method you choose or which trajectory you apply. But I am generally in favor of, I think, what makes the 2026 target kind of the least ambitious just because I don't want there to be like a huge sticker shock at the beginning. I think like setting that a little bit lower and letting things ramp up in 2028 and 2029 is sort of preferable generally, which could be achieved by either modifying the trajectory or by using this GWSA target method, I guess.
So of the options there, then Emily, which one would you be leaning toward?
The GWSA target method, I think. Or actually, was that, or, well, yeah, good question. Either the GWSA target or I kind of like the fuel cells, honestly. And I do think even no matter what decision we make on this, we should flag for ANR and have some conversation about what method they're actually using for the inventory, because it seems like they should eventually be using the best fuel sales data from Vermont instead of this EIA study database potentially.
Yeah, I have to look again at what the data source is for the AN study, because there's been questions about the tax data and if it is really, if it's counting resales that like Matt could have brought up in double counting. So presumably that's all sorted out, but just a question.
And from what Deirdre said, that is becoming hopefully clearer with each passing week as you check out those gaps. I think we've taken this particular topic as far as we can today. Fair
Yeah.
statement?
I think even just stating the options is progress, right? So this subgroup could, in writing, say, these are the options. We're leaning towards using tax data instead of the latest inventory data, for example. I think that would be helpful.
Would you be okay sharing your calculations there, TJ?
Oh yeah, I'll send this one. And
Yeah, maybe could you just quickly stick in a label on each row, like this is which methodology you're using, like based on latest tax department sales, based on 2018,
yeah.
based on, just so we can.
Yes, maybe you can't see it. It should be in there on the left hand side.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's behind my, yeah, that was behind your faces in my.
Sorry, I have to move the Zoom people around so that I can see the whole screen. But if you don't have two monitors, it doesn't help you.
Yeah, wonder 2022 tax data, if 2023 was really just a warm winter, which it was.
I think the number was 18% warmer than typical.
Then 2022 might, I don't know. I guess the question, do we bother weather normalizing? But again, I keep diving back into the weeds, and I think these are all
I think we need to come
reasonable.
back to that.
So
I think that we're going to need to come back to that,
right.
That detail.
Okay, so is somebody writing that up? Is the options?
I'm prepared to do that, but if someone else would prefer to, just let me know.
I've been capturing this in my notes, and I bet Deirdre has too, but I've been capturing it, the options that you've laid out so far.
Yeah, I've been taking screenshots as well.
I can pass that on to you after this call, Michelle.
Okay, so that we can summarize and plan to bring this to is bringing this information to, well, we need to bring it to the tag first. So are we still within your timelines, Deirdre, for bringing this to our next tag meeting next week?
Trying to think about the value of breaking it down to this small of a piece for the full
No,
tag.
I'm just saying, just in general, to let them know, but are there any pieces that you need?
No, I think, but I think this is a good starting point to realize that like each of these steps of getting to, yeah, just that there are many options, and if tag is leaning towards one, that's helpful. So,
Yeah, so I mean, you've got so yeah, what I think we could do quickly is document the options and summarize sort of some of the discussion and the follow-up questions. The there are future tasks around kind of reconciliation with the ANR inventory and the measure mix methodology. And it sounds like now we have questions about how much the fuel data is going to be used in the GHG inventory. And that makes me think that we would benefit from having an ANR representative on our next call. So I wanted to flag that if we could, I don't know if it's a separate subgroup meeting, whenever we next meet, if we could figure out how to do that. And Catherine and Rick and I are working on the agenda for the next tag meeting, and I think it's not likely to include subgroup breakouts, but rather subgroup report outs, because we need to do a report out on the credit ownership group and kind of what they want to report, like how they want to respond back to I don't know if it was a PSD or a PUC proposal, but there's like a proposal they're reviewing and they want to report out to the full tag. I'm not sure that we need to report out to the full tag yet, given where we are in our process. So I guess my suggestion is that we document this kind of offline. We don't need to report it out, and that we try to set up a separate side meeting so that Brian doesn't get conflicted, or whoever from ANR, and try to just ask ANR to participate so we can dive into some of the inventory reconciliation questions.
Any comments or questions about Emily's proposal there?
Yeah, I wonder if it makes sense for just one or two of us to just reach out to ANR, or if we think it should be the whole subgroup here.
Well, I do think so. Let's just quickly document our questions for ANR. So one is, what data will they use to compile the GHG inventory? Like, are they going to switch their method from what they've done in the past? And then another, I don't know what all the questions are, but there's something that I haven't fully wrapped my head around reconciling the clean heat standard methodology with the ANR inventory methodology that I would like to better understand. So that first one, I think I would be totally fine having you take offline, TJ, and just like discuss. And or if you can get them to send us the latest inventory data, that would also be useful to look at. But that second question of like the reconciliation, I do wonder whether it might be helpful to hear from ANR directly to better understand the issue, or maybe everyone else understands the reconciliation issue more fully than I do, and in which case I'll just get myself up to speed.
Well, I'll reinforce, I think in some ways there are questions that you could simply pose and bring back, but I think it would be helpful. It needn't be a long meeting, but I do think it would be helpful for us to have even a 20-minute session with all of us present with ANR so that we can hear the answers all at the same time.
I would agree.
Okay. On that second question, I don't think A&R, I think it'd be interesting to hear their hot thoughts. I don't think they have any particular expertise related to the reconciliation of the requirements of the clean heat standard versus the inventory. They'll know the inventory, but
If I understand that, they're providing data to us. They're not doing those analyses. That's part of what the tag's being asked to make recommendations on how that will happen. And am I correct there? A&R is a source of data for us.
yes.
And they're keeping their separate tracking for the GWSA.
So one assumption that would be good to clear up for my own understanding, and maybe because we could use it, is ANR just wrapped up that project where they had a consultant do the upstream emissions, essentially trying to make a complement to the inventory to get closer to life cycle emissions numbers, and wondering if something can be taken from that in terms of like an emissions factor for different fuel types that could be borrowed from the methodology that they're using there or not, or if that's way off. That's something I'm curious about, given that that is something, now that they're supplementing the inventory with upstream emissions analysis, what does that mean for being able to look at the inventory on a life cycle basis?
That's an excellent point. I don't know that
And I think
we can answer that now, but
we do have,
we can.
Rick, I think I haven't seen that, but apparently it's circulating and will be shared with the tag soon. So I don't understand these issues. I need to wrap my head around them more.
Well,
I don't know if the process of like getting us all up to speed on the scope of the issues and the options would benefit from having ANR in the room or not. It seems like it might, but
I think we've got a couple different things going on there. There's one for ANR as a resource, and then that other question about how newer data streams are bringing us more realistic numbers that could be applicable to what we're doing here with the clean heat standard.
So it would seem we could move ahead with the understanding the inventory and data within that, assumptions within that. And then, certainly later on, try to re-engage and get more information on the upstream emissions work that's been done.
Summarized nicely.
But yeah, I'm not sure who at ANR that is, but so I don't know if anyone on this call knows who that would be.
I think that might be, Catherine, is that something we could put a request to ANR to find out? Or TJ, would you?
Looks like TJ knows.
So sorry, I had to step away for a second for the phone call, but I'm happy to reach out to ANR to ask whatever questions or get them in a meeting. Brian's always usually very happy to meet and organize something. If missed the last bit of the conversation, but if we can like articulate the bullet points that we want to talk about, I think that would be helpful to setting up the meeting.
The two, Haley just summarized it nicely. One, understanding the greenhouse gas inventory and the data assumptions for the information that's been provided. Understanding any potential usefulness or implications of the upstream emissions report that was recently filed, and if that could be combined, or if there are any plans to combine that with their future reporting.
And Emily had also said, are there future plans to potentially use data other than EIA data if they found it to be more accurate? I think that was a third. Which they-
Yes.
Yeah, I'm worried now that we've uncovered a potential problem if we're ultimately using the greenhouse gas inventory to track, and then the greenhouse gas inventory is using some like other total different source of data that is totally out of sync. I don't know how big of a concern
This is what we knew this was a potential tension, so it's good that we've identified it clearly now. And
Okay.
not a bad thing, Emily.
I know that I think the Climate Action Council did an overview or a review of the inventory. So I would be surprised if there was anything like shockingly, you know, like why is this the data there? But totally agree that it is worth learning about and hearing about what their current thoughts are on the quality and appropriateness of data in there.
Well, this has been a good discussion. I'm looking at the time. We're coming up on 5 o'clock. Given the information that Emily just shared, that we're not likely to have a breakout discussion during the next TAG meeting. Is it worth trying to see when the next opportunity would be to convene this group outside of the normal Thursday TAG?
And not to speak for you, Deirdre, but on our kind of planning call for the TAG meeting, Deirdre highlighted, which was striking to me, that there are only like 8 TAG meetings between now and the time that really like rules have to be drafted. So therefore, we may need to do some more side meetings. And I do wonder if it would behoove us to just like maybe the off weeks where we don't have the full TAG meeting, we just put like an hour on our calendar or something like that, just to, we can always cancel it if we don't need it, but that way we don't have to go through a scheduling exercise every single time.
Excellent point.
See, I'm taking your
Yeah.
concerns to heart, Deirdre.
That works for me, every Thursday at 9:30 that we don't have a tag meeting for an hour would be perfect. But I also think we might want to have one next week. But
Thursdays at 9:30 work for me too.
I won't be able to make those, but that's okay.
They work for me.
is there a time Thursday mornings that work? Because I feel like it was pretty valuable to have you on this call.
After
Yeah, I
10:30,
agree. I think it's really helpful to make sure that we're working towards the information the PUC actually needs.
yeah.
What did you say?
After 10:30,
10:30 also works for me.
10:30 to 11:30 or?
Yep.
That
So
works
I
for
give
me.
you enough.
Yeah, that generally works for me. I have occasional things I need to shift, but I think that would be the case at any time.
And to TJ's point about next week,
Well, so we've been trying to use the standing tag meeting link so that we don't have to always update the page that does on the PUC's advisory group meeting links page. Does that work, Catherine, to reuse that on every other Thursday on, or do we just need to?
Yes, no, yeah, I just had to set it up that way originally. Sorry for the confusion for canceling, but yes, I can do that. I can use the normal tag meeting link.
Okay.
And in the case, if in every case, I can't assign opening the meeting to any of you until I get in there. So I'll open it. I'm available at
Oh.
10:30 and I'll open it, but I'll have to probably hand it over to you because I have a standing 11 o'clock on Thursday. So
Okay.
I'll hand it over to you and then you'll have full control over everything. But happy to do that.
Great.
So I can set up recurring meetings through when?
July.
August. End of August, end of July. Okay. I will do that 9:30 or 10:30 to 11:30 every Thursday that you're not having a tag meeting. Got it.
Mhm.
Okay, I will do it.
Great. Should we end with if any members of the public, I think the
Yes.
BGS dropped off, so Cynthia's here, but she mentioned she wouldn't speak, so probably okay. Unless you've changed your mind.
Do we want to keep progress and try and do something next week while we're all here? Our calendars open, or do you want to wait? Otherwise, we're waiting 2 weeks to.
Right, that question's still out there. Can't do it Thursday at the same time, though. Does that mess things up if we haven't? No, we simply use the link at a different time.
Yes.
Wednesday morning available for folks.
15th?
Yeah, morning should be.
I could do 10 to 11.
That works for me.
And 10 to
Okay.
11 on the 15th.
Would that be
Are
the
we-
meeting we were trying to tie in A&R or someone like Colin or something from
That's
or
my question.
Brian?
I think so, but I also think we could make progress if they can't make it.
On the rest of the bullets, yeah.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So that we just schedule it now and then they can't make it.
Mhm.
We either try again in the interim or wait until the following week.
That makes sense.
Well, Catherine, you send out meeting invites or somebody